Ho ho! Sight reading. One of the most kind of feared, memed, most fearful kind of things a guitar player can sort of have put in front of him, really. Let's talk about it. What's going on, guys? Happy New Year to you all. I hope it's been a good one. And I know New Year can be a kind of strange thing for some people. So if you are someone that has those kind of things, just keep going. It'll all be all right. Don't give up. So this is a video in response to a recent YouTube comment. The last video I made, the cruise ship guitar, kind of everything I can tell you, my experience video, my truth. A comment on that from @4breakdance. He says, "Hey, thanks for the info. I would like to get a cruise musician job. Could you recommend me some apps or etudes to improve sight reading skills?" So I thought I'd talk about the sight reading thing. There's sight reading and then reading, and I kind of consider them slightly different. Obviously, they both feed into the same thing, but just being able to read music and just being able to turn what is on the page into music is one thing. But being in a very intense rehearsal or gig situation where somebody puts a piece of music in front of you and it's kind of fight or flight, live or die kind of situation where you've just got to read it and do it right then and there. That's slightly different, but I want to talk about how to get started, talk about some books and things that I can recommend, pros and cons of different things, core minimal skill set, if you will, for actually being able to read, because there's things that you will need to know on the guitar a little bit in order to do the reading thing. So, first off, where to start? An old music teacher a while back once said to me, and this is perhaps rather a simplistic way of looking at it, but said, when it comes to reading music, there's two bits of information. There is what the note is and how long you're playing it for. Obviously, there's a bit more to it than that when you take into consideration how you're delivering the notes and dynamics and all sorts of other things. But, if it's in terms of what is on the page and can you turn the written note into an actual played note, that's not a bad way of looking at it, especially if you're starting out. What is the note and how long you're playing it for? So you can look at it in two things: the rhythmic aspect and then the actual notes that you're playing, the actual notes that are written down. If you are new to the sight reading thing or you're trying to get into reading music, if you kind of start, I would say you could start with the rhythmic aspect, because as guitar players, maybe you're used to seeing tab. And one of the things about tab is sometimes, depending on what you're looking at, all the information might not necessarily be there. You might just have, the numbers. So it's that string, it's that fret, and it might not have the rhythmic information there. If you're used to using things like guitar profiles, when you've got the tab at the bottom and then the standard notation at the top, kind of get into the habit of using the two kind of in conjunction with each other. So you've got the tab to tell you where you're playing the notes, and then you can look at the rhythm at the top to know the rhythm. So starting to read rhythms and to learn to read rhythms. The rhythmic aspect of things, I would say, is a bit easier because guitar specifics talking here, there's not really any indication of you don't have to change position or something. A rhythm is just a rhythm. So you don't have to think, when we're going to play that, is that going to be in the right range? The rhythm is just a rhythm. The rhythm would be the same if you tapped it out on a saucepan compared to playing it on a chord. What I would do with regards to rhythmic information is try and work your way through the subdivisions and almost master each one. So if you think about the variations that you can have on quarter notes, or crotchets, as we say in Europe, or maybe not Europe anymore, keep it light, playing on every single beat, you can have putting a rest here, so it's 1, nothing, 3, 4, you can put a rest here, you can put a rest here, you can put a rest here, rest here. There'll be some maths genius out there that'll be able to go, oh, it's this times this, and that equals the amount of variations. But being able to absolutely master just that, so 1, 3, 1, 2, 3, 2, 3, 4. Now that might sound quite simple, but that level of being able to just look at it and go, cool, I can read that rhythm, is what you're looking for as you work your way up. Now, obviously, if you change the quarter notes into eighth notes, you've got more options of where rests could be. You've got more variations. So being able to see those and master it, almost like you want to be able to look at rhythms almost like you're reading a word. So if you see a rhythm, you just recognize it. As long as it's written correctly, if you like, and we'll get to some of that later. Being able to see these little beamed rhythms or rests involved, and being able to just kind of see it like words, and then building that up. So maybe up to 16th notes, or a combination of quarter notes and eighth notes, all rests involved. Maybe some ties, get used to tied notes, and then working your way up through the different subdivisions, so that when you see a rhythm, you can kind of see it a bit like a word. Now, obviously, sometimes you'll get something and it'll be like a crazy amount of rests, or you have to kind of look at it and be like, right, and almost depends what it is, but maybe you just put a bit of pencil in there just to see where the beats land. If it looks horrendous and there's like loads of rests, you're like, right, okay. So I would do that. You can do that on one note, you can do it on a chord or a chord progression, and just get used to that. Now, one thing that perhaps doesn't necessarily get talked about when it comes to reading music or sight reading is perhaps spending some time writing music out. Like, I'm sure this goes for a lot of people, but there's probably things that you could play quite easily that are, really flashy and time feels great, and maybe they're really rhythmically advanced. But to write that down might be an absolute nightmare. So getting used to doing something like that, or, I've mentioned Guitar Pro once already. Not sponsored, it's just something I use for writing things out for people. You have to know rhythmically what's going on to be able to do that. Obviously the tab thing, it's that note on that string, it's that fret. That's not too bad. But spending time being able to write things out as well, it'll just help to solidify your understanding of rhythms and being able to write them out. And also the conventions for writing things out. One thing that doesn't get mentioned that much when it comes to this kind of stuff is, in a perfect world, you'll get these scores that are pristine, digitally written out, absolutely no mistakes. Sometimes you might get on a gig where something's handwritten. Sometimes you might get on a gig where, I might be able to show in a little bit, but some of the charts are really old. I've done Drams theatre shows in the past where the music that you're getting is photocopied from handwritten notes from like the 1970s. And that looks very different. And some of the writing conventions are perhaps slightly different than if you get something a bit more modern, shall we say. So as far as rhythm stuff goes, that would be my tip. If you can get that going, and you'll probably find that you can get that way quicker because it is quite sort of mathematical and you've already probably played a lot of these things. Something that you play, what does that look like written down? That's one aspect of it. Now, as far as being able to read notes, obviously you've got to learn the notes on the stave. That's one thing. That's quite a sort of basic thing to do, and you might have already done that. But take some time to do that. One of the things I tell people when they're learning anything is to try and remove doubt. So what do I mean by that? So a lot of the things I do tend to be like quest for improvisational prowess, if you like. So removing doubt is being able to access the information without going, oh, what is it? Because that little tiny bit of doubt, that little seed of doubt in the moment will slow you down. Like if you're just trying to read like a chord chart, if a chord comes up and you go, oh, what is it? By the time you've thought, oh, what is it? The chord's gone, it's over for you. So removing doubt. So spending time just looking at maybe some sheet music and just saying the notes to yourself. Just go, oh, that's a C, that's an E, that's an F sharp, and so on. So that's one thing. Finding the notes on the guitar is another thing. So just before we get into it, a little friendly reminder to subscribe, hit the like button, hit the bell notification, leave a comment, and it might lead to a video like this in the future. Based on your comment, it could be you. But obviously it helps with the encouragement of doing more of these. So, on with the video. Ta-da! So, the final product, or the final thing you're trying to be able to achieve, is to know where all the notes are on the fretboard. There's multiple ways of going about this, and depending on how your mind works, one way might be perhaps more kind of efficient than the other, but the goal is to be able to just put your finger somewhere, hit a note, and know exactly what it is. Put my finger here, E flat, put my finger here, D, put my finger here, B, to be able to do that. Now, as I say, the bit behind the scenes getting to that point doesn't necessarily matter. It depends how your mind works. I know we're all in the quest for the most kind of economical, kind of straight line way of doing something, and that's great. As long as if I say I play this note, which is the 8th fret of the B string, I know that's a G. As long as my brain in the moment isn't going like this, oh, that's a G there, I have to go down an octave, G. You know, as long as I'm not doing that in the moment because there isn't time to do that, then that's fine. So there's a couple of ways of doing it. You could do it positionally. You could spend time just doing each string. You could go E, F, F sharp, G and do it like that. The way I did it initially, and again, it's no right or wrong, I don't think anyway for this kind of thing. The way I did it initially is, if you think about the notes that you probably already know on the fretboard, say you play a G, if I said to you, play a G bar chord, you might go here, or you might go here. If you play a G bar chord here, you're probably going off this note here, which is a G, which means you probably know the notes of the E and the A string already, because if you're playing bar chords and moving them around, you're probably going off where your first finger is, and that will be the root note. So you probably know the E or the A strings. If you don't, then that's a place to start. So if you know the E and the A strings, that also means you know the high E, because it'll be the same notes as the low E. Play a G here, there'll be a G here. Now, the way I did it initially was through octaves. So if I knew this G, and I was super certain of that, if I've got this octave shape there, that means I know this G here. So I know the 3rd fret of the E is a G, and I know that the 5th fret of the D is a G. And then maybe same thing there, that octave, so that would be 5 on the D is the same as 8 on the B. It's also a G. Or maybe this octave, if you take a C chord, standard cowboy C shape, your 3rd finger is on the C on the A string, your 1st finger is also on a C on the B string. So you've got that. Now, it doesn't matter how you get there, but the process has to be that you know what the note is instantly without having to reverse engineer it to get there, if that makes sense. So I know that's a C, but I'm not going thinking of that C and then working it up, because there just isn't time. There's no time. That's one way of doing it. The octaves, as I say, you can go through and kind of walk your way up and get used to it that way. What I would do is maybe try and find stuff that you already know and use that as a way of building around it. So if someone's first trying to do the bar chord thing and you're trying to learn the E and the A strings, if you think of a G chord and a C chord, if you take the root notes of those chords, the lowest note you play on that chord, G for the G, and then a C for the C. So if I know that's C and I want C sharp, I'll just go what 1. So the C is already locked in, and then, oh, that's C sharp. Then eventually what you want to do is just know that that's C sharp and not have to do the reverse engineering kind of thing. You could also maybe take scales that you know and then kind of fill it in that way. So if you knew a C scale here, C major scale, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, like that. You've got to put the work in somewhere to do it. So one way of testing that would be to just randomly put your finger on a string and then say what the note is. Put my finger there, that is G sharp. Put my finger here, that is E flat. Put my finger here, C sharp, and be able to do that. Or you could say to yourself, maybe I want to find a G on every string. So I'll start on the E string, G there, G there, G there, G there, G there, G there, G there. And be able to do that at speed. That's like a good little marker to do that. That's finding the notes on the fretboard. It's one of those things that just takes time, but you want to make it so that you can go straight to the note and you don't need to reverse engineer it and go through multiple steps to get there. So as far as starting to read things on guitar, there's a couple of ways of doing it I would kind of recommend. I, to be honest, didn't get like a kind of hard and fast system when I started doing this. I actually didn't start doing this till university, I don't think. Reading on guitar is one of those things that you sort of don't need to do until you need to do it, if that makes any sense. Most of the time, you know, nobody's seeing that written out on standard notation. Guitar music doesn't tend to be written out that way. It tends to be more pattern based, or, you know, we've got tab to communicate these patterns and so on. What you want to try and do this early on is think of it like kind of like going to the gym or something. You're not going to be able to go and just start picking up, you know, we're going to walk in day one and start carrying around 2 Atlas stones on each shoulder, right? Like Hercules. It's just not going to happen. So you want to start simple. So think about where you're at with it. Think about rhythmically where you're at. Start simple, and you want to get yourself into, if you're trying to do the sight reading thing, get yourself into the sight reading mindset. Now by that, I mean not letting yourself off the hook and being able to look at something and try and do it without stopping. When you first start out, that's the most difficult thing. And perhaps, that's the doubt kicking in, if you like. Forcing yourself to look at, to try and actually do the sight reading thing and not stop. If you've not done any reading at all, even just doing a chord progression would be good. So getting a chord progression up and trying to look at it and to read it as you're going along without stopping. So take something simple. There's plenty of things out there where you could just look at little 8-bar exercises. What you could probably do, I've got a little stack of books here that I'll tell you about in a minute, but just get some like simple sort of children's songs, or like, there's probably a charity shop somewhere that's got like violin music or flute music, like, grade 1 pieces, or like initial grade pieces or something like that. Just something that you could get that's not going to be, costly or difficult really. You want to make sure that you get something that isn't for a transposing instrument. That's another thing. Violin, flute, guitar. What you don't want to get is things like trumpet, clarinet, saxophone. All those will be transposing instruments, so it's not quite gonna work out. You're not going to be playing in concerts, if you like. Oh, one note actually, the guitar is actually a transposing instrument. It sounds an octave lower than what's written. So middle C on piano, I believe, is here. And then middle C, if you wrote it out and then played on guitar, would be here. Something to note, because sometimes maybe somebody will write something out and you'll have to play it up an octave. So a couple of systems. One would be to maybe check out what the key is. If it's something very diatonic, if you check out what the key is, so say it's something in C, you can maybe think positionally. The positional thing is quite a big deal, because you want to be able to know where the notes are without having to look at your hand all the time. So obviously, if the melody went, you don't want to be going, because that's a lot of position shifts, and you'll have to take your eyes off the music to sort of do that. You want to be able to sit there, look at the music, and go like that, or if you did it there or there. You see what I mean? So thinking about what the key is and setting yourself up in a position. So there's two things to think about really: positions and range. Say it's in C major and the starting note is here, that E on the 12th fret. You're not going to be able to get that down here, so you'll have to start in a high position. If it's something where the lowest note is a C, say the highest note in the kind of piece is a B, there, you got a couple of options. Either you could start it in a position where you can reach all of those notes, or you can kind of do the odd shift depending on what's going on. So setting yourself up in a position is one thing, and then trying to know which notes are available under each finger. So if I'm here and I'm in this open position, C major, I know that my third finger here, if we're going to do the kind of one finger per fret system, my third finger can get D here, I can get the G there, I've got an F there, it's B flat there, in case there's a B flat. I've got a D here, and I've got a G here, and then so on. Second finger gets all those notes, first finger gets all those notes. Open strings are open strings. If I then move this to the second position, maybe, the notes that are under each finger are different than they were in the open position. So I need to be able to do that without having to look at my fingers. It's that mental thing of going, right, well, if I'm here, my second finger's on a C, that means my little finger can get D, first finger can get the E there, can also get a B, can get a G with my little finger. Knowing what's underneath, so if you see a little phrase, knowing where it is and being able to play it in different positions. It's another reason to read in different positions, which is in a book, which I'll get to in just a second. The other thing, like when I was first taught this, I was using jazz standards. It kind of flexed a lot of different muscles. So there was the reading part of like sitting there and reading the melody, and then comping and sort of reading the chords, and then taking a solo and then playing the melody out between me and my guitar teacher at the time at university. So if you've got two people, if you've got a friend, let's face it, we're all just sat in a room on our own for thousands of hours telling each other it's not good enough. But if you happen to have a friend or someone else that's also trying to do this, that could be a way of working these muscles together. So you've got somebody who reads the melody, the other guy's reading the chords, and then you switch. Maybe the other guy plays the melody out by reading it, and then you can take solos and you can work on a lot of different things at the same time together. So the way I was initially taught this was with a bit of a kind of catch-all sort of scenario, and that is still a positional thing. So it'll be one finger per fret, perhaps starting, say, the 5th fret, so right in the middle of the guitar, kind of good sort of range. You can cover a lot of stuff. So first finger would be covering the 5th fret, second finger 6, third finger 7, little finger 8th fret. And then you also allow yourself 1 fret either side. So the first finger can go this way 1 and get all these notes on the 4th fret. And then your little finger can go this way 1 and get everything on the 9th fret. So by doing that, range-wise, you get from this G sharp all the way up to here. That C sharp. That's quite a range. All those notes in between. So I'd take a jazz standard and use that system. And again, doing that and thinking about what notes are under each finger and where they are. You know, you might run into the odd, awkward sort of fingering, or if there's chromaticism involved, it might sort of perhaps be better delivery if you did it like this rather than or like that. But again, if you're trying to do the reading thing and just looking at it and translating the notes on the page into some resemblance of music, it's a way to start. So answering the initial question, book recommendations. So one book that I used, that there'll be loads out there, but one book that I used, I thought was laid out quite well, is this one, which is Sight Reading for the Contemporary Guitarist. As you can see on the front, there are some contemporary guitar players there. This one's even jumping in the air, very contemporary. So the way this is laid out is have the notes on each string, so going up each single note like that. But then the cool thing is it's split into keys, and it gives you specific ways and specific exercises to do. So you have an exercise and it will say play in 2nd, 5th, 7th positions. So it's done the work for you in terms of thinking about the range. So you go 2nd position, right, I can get to all the notes there. 5th position, first finger on the 5th fret, I can get to all the notes there. 7th position. Now, when there's keys involved, this is kind of doing the thing I was saying before of setting yourself up so all the scale notes, because it's all diatonic, are under the hand. They're basically under a scale position that you probably already know. So 2nd position here would be around this C major scale down here. And then 5th position would be around this C major scale starting on the little finger. 7th position would be around this position there, which is kind of around the barcode shape, if you like. Because it has those different exercises, like playing in these different positions, and it really does work up. So it starts with very simple stuff, and then later on, the rhythms get a bit more involved. So they start getting some 16th notes in there and some rest and some dotted notes. Then it's got harmonic reading exercises. So it's multiple notes at the same time, which is where things get trickier because you're reading multiple notes at the same time, obviously. So you've got a positionally that poses a bit of a threat because it's kind of like, whoa, can I reach both of those notes at the same time? But doing that and doing it slowly and having it built up in a kind of a systematic way, it means that you're still going to be in that sight reading mode. So you're not going to end up stopping, basically. You can really build up and sort of get used to reading multiple notes at the same time. And the other thing is you start to see some of the things you already know how to play, how they look written in standard notation. So if I play a G major chord here, because of the way that's stacked, that would just be third, 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 and you get to see what that looks like. Or if you just play the top 3 strings like that, you get to see what that looks like, and you'll start to kind of recognize the spacing between the notes for different intervals. So like what a 5th looks like. So if you play a little power chord, you'll know what that looks like. And it gets further and further into the different keys, so more sharps and flats and things like that, and it gets more involved. So I recommend that one. It's quite good. Everyone will have their own recommendation of these things, but that's quite good. I'll go over the pros and cons of these different things in a moment. So that's one thing. The other thing, as I've already mentioned, is real books. So if you're trying to do the jazz thing, you can flip to whatever standard you want and then just try and read the melody. Now, obviously, jazz rhythms in standards will be perhaps quite different to if you get like a classical sort of flute piece. The jazz thing is probably going to be more syncopated, a lot more upbeats, especially if you try and read things like bossa novas and things like that. The melodies for those are usually quite sort of on the off, and you have to kind of really get used to being on the offbeat and then landing now and again. So that's another recommendation. The other thing is, if you are trying to perhaps get into reading gigs, what I would recommend, and this is what I did, this is what a few of the reading musicians that I know have also done, is try and get involved, if possible, with like a local kind of Amdram musical sort of thing, there may or may not be money involved. So bear that in mind. And if there is, it might not be loads. However, if you're trying to get into the reading thing and you want to do that kind of gig, a lot of the times, the music that those guys hire in, as far as I know, is pretty much the same as the professional version, if you like. Unless it's like an abridged version or a youth version or something like that. It's basically the same music. And the other thing is you're getting used to what these things look like. So I have a few here. So I've got from shows I've done in the past. I'm not sure what the legalities are of me having these. However, West Side Story, that's a hell of a read. Oh, still West Side. Apparently I've done West Side Story twice because it's West Side Story again. Got it, Swaps, mate. Hairspray, Guitars 1 and 2. Billy Elliot for Schools, so that might be slightly different than the original one. And then, what is this? The cover's gone on this one. What the hell is this? You know what? We'll never know. But this is actually just a kind of like piano vocal thing. So that's another thing to mention, is that you might not always get, depending on what you're doing, you might not always get a pristine, perfectly written part. Sometimes you might get something like this, and they're just wanting to read the chords over the top, and you have to make choices. So you have to do the reading thing, but also interpret what is going on. So, there's a point to be made about that. The thing with the Amdram thing is, so if I find this Hairspray here, is it's going to be a bit more realistic, and you're going to get more of a range of things. So, for instance, there's a song here where it's primarily just chords and then some stabs. You'll also get single line stuff as well. I don't even know if you can see this on camera, but you get single line stuff. So you'll get a more realistic mix. So pros and cons of different things. If you're looking at something quite classical and it's just, sort of flute exercises or whatever, it's probably going to be in a key and not that many accidentals or chromaticism in the early stages. With the first book that I showed, again, that starts and a lot of it is key-based, so you're not going to necessarily have to be reading accidentals. When it gets to the kind of show stuff, that's going to be a mix of chords and single notes, and you're going to start seeing a bit more chromaticism. With the jazz standards and stuff, there's probably going to be chromaticism in there. You're going to be moving around. Something else that you can do is maybe look at, I've got a Charlie Parker omnibook there, and there's like loads of crazy bebop solos to try and read through. So you want to try and read as much as possible. When chromaticism gets added, that's when your positions can kind of get a bit more, you have to kind of make decisions on the fly of how to do that. So there's pros and cons to each one. Reading in a key is great because it all sits in position, and then you can really get used to where the notes are. Some of the other stuff, rhythmically, might be a bit more advanced and will be a bit more real world. So as far as recommendations of books and things like that, that's what I'd recommend. Getting a good book that's sort of systematized, that's probably a word, in different keys and things like that, so that it's nicely laid out and goes through in a very manageable way so you don't get scared off. Obviously, learning the rhythms, learning the notes on the fretboard, that's a bit of a must before you do this kind of stuff, really. You could do it as you're going along, but it'll make it more difficult, and it's more likely that you'll stop to figure something out. So if you can try and level your understanding of music with what you're reading, you'll stay in that sight reading mindset and get the results that you want probably quicker that way. Real books, if you can get into the Amdram thing, that's good. Writing some of this stuff out as much as possible, or just getting used to seeing stuff written out. If, like me, you're perhaps trying to do the jazz thing and you start getting these different books, you're not going to see tab, unless it's a specific guitar book. If a lot of the times I've got a David Baker How to Play Bebop 2 Electric Boogaloo here, and that's all just notation. You're not going to get something like that written out for guitar. A lot of these kind of these books will be in standard notation, so that more people can read them, basically. So just spending as much time as you can looking at written music or writing written music out. Guitar Pro is a good place to start for rhythms and stuff like that, but then maybe try and get into Sibelius or write for other instruments. Just get used to seeing this kind of stuff. And one last thing I'll say about all this is it is a skill that is a bit like a garden, if you like, as in that it needs to be sort of tended kind of regularly, or it will sort of dwindle a little bit. It won't completely die off, as you know, to keep to this metaphor, but if you don't do it all the time, that doubt will creep in and that rust will be there. And I think of it like a balloon. So you hit a balloon up and then it slowly starts coming back down. If you don't hit it up again, in this metaphor, this would be practicing your sight reading, then it'll just drop. And you'll have to blow up the metaphorical balloon and start all over again. So there's a load of recommendations. I hope this makes sense. I hope it helps. Any questions, leave a comment, and it might lead to another video just like this one. Good luck, take it slow, get into that sort of sight reading mindset, and I'll see you on the next one.